Hi everyone, welcome to our interview sessions. So we are very honored, and but before that, let's make hi everyone. I'm Mr. Lim from SAP Academy, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us in this video. And we are very honored today to have with us the principal and teacher from Zenith Studio. Sorry, let me just restart. Okay. Hi everyone, welcome. Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our. Okay, let me think of what I have to say. Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. We hope this session will be informative and useful for you. I'm Mr. Lim from SAP Academy, and it is our pleasure and our honor to invite Mr. Evans from Zenith Studio. Thank you so much for coming here and sharing all so much useful information. We really cannot wait. But before that, probably can you share a little bit about what you teach and why do you teach it?
Hi, my name is Evan, as he said. I'm actually the principal tutor and director of Zenith Education Studios. So we're actually a JC and secondary school tuition center that offers programs such as JC Physics, JC Math, JC Economics, as well as secondary school math as well. So I'm actually the head of the economics department, but actually moving forward next year I'm taking more of a back end role, going more into management. But for the last 4 to 5 years I've been teaching economics. On average, every single year I take about 200 students, so roughly about 80 J1s every year, and about 120 J2s every single year. Yep. So that's basically my background.
Well, that's really quite a huge pool of students.
Yeah.
So I guess like you must have a lot of experience in teaching economics. So I'm very sure our viewers will have quite a number of questions as they progress from Set 4 and they want to find out a little bit more about economics. So now coming from Set 4, like because not a lot of students, not a lot of schools will offer economics as like a Set 4
Yeah.
O-level subject. So can you tell us a little bit about what is economics?
Wow, the question always makes me have to think a lot because I like subjects such as physics, chemistry, math. I think it's very easy to actually describe what exactly they are. But when people ask me about economics, normally what I do is I like to separate it into a few different categories. So normally in your J1 year, you'll learn something called microeconomics. So microeconomics is as simple as it boils down to exactly what the firms, the households, and the governments in the economy, how they actually behave, how they actually conduct their decision making process. So some of the topics that is included in microeconomics includes demand and supply, which is as simple as when you go to the supermarket, the demand for your eggs, your demand for your milk, or how exactly, where does it come from, where is the supply coming from. So how does it affect the price of the goods sold, how does it affect how much of the goods is actually sold as well. So at the same time, we also need to take a look at it from a government point of view. When the government has limited resources, how do I actually allocate resources to different sectors of the economy? Should I allocate more resources to healthcare? Should I allocate more resources to education? So the last topics for microeconomics is actually about market structure, how firms behave, the strategies they use. So if I were to really just simplify it, it's just about how the households in society, the firms in society, and the government actually have to overcome the limitations of their limited resources to actually make decisions on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, seems like
Yeah.
it's a totally new discipline, unlike any of the humanities or sciences which we have studied in the Set 3, Set 4 syllabus.
Yeah,
So,
but actually for economics, I would actually tell a lot of people that it's the most real world topic because that's for microeconomics. For macroeconomics, we learn things about how does the country on a whole, what's going on in the country, like in terms of what's the unemployment levels, how does the country grow in terms of their real national income, which is basically how much money they earn, how are the prices of goods and services actually determined. So it's actually something that you actually observe on a day-to-day basis. So actually it's nothing new. Like a lot of students go into JC thinking that economics is a brand new subject, but actually it's the subject that actually occurs on in your day-to-day lives. It's just that we don't really pay too much attention and we don't really use any like technical jargon or actually go too in depth in terms of what are all these things happening around us every day. Yeah.
oh, it's really interesting. Like if like I take on economics as a subject, then so it does mean that next time if I go to the supermarket, I can like help my parents, make a more prudent choice in like making some of the supermarket decisions. Is that so?
That's one way to look at it. But definitely, I feel like a lot of things in the real world, you might not quite understand why they're happening, but as you go deeper into the economic syllabus, as you read the newspaper or even on a day-to-day basis, what firms like Apple or Nike, what they do in order to actually increase their profits, things like that. Those are things that you can actually identify that are highly related to your economic syllabus that you're expected to actually take up in the JC program.
Seems like it's really beneficial. It doesn't just help us in our everyday lives, but it also inducts us into a sort of like macroscopic point of view to understand what's happening in the world and what will affect us and our everyday lives from a small point of view as well as a macro point of view. Is that so? Where you're trying to come from?
Definitely.
So, well, this is a very, very applicable topic. No wonder it's like really popular with students as one of their choices for H2 chemistry and econs and physics and math. So now, having said that, we want to understand a little bit since we broach on the subject of H2.
Yeah.
So a lot of my students would have this question. So can you help to answer this? Like, what is the difference between H1 and H2 economics?
Well, actually, there are some key distinctions in terms of the syllabus. So, if I were to summarize, actually, H2 economics actually has 7 major topics. So, in J1 year, you'll learn 4, which is a central problem of economics, demand and supply, market failure, and market structure. Whereas in J2 year, you'll learn topics such as your key economic indicators, your macroeconomic aims, challenges, and policies, and last but not least, your international economics. So the grand total, there's 7 different topics. However, for H1, on the other hand, there's actually only 5 topics. So the 2 topics that the H2 will actually cover would be market structure as well as your international economics. So I would say that if you were to compare the two, there isn't that much of a difference in terms of syllabus. In fact, I would say before 2017, before they had a minor change in the syllabus, a H1 student could in fact even go into the H2 paper and do the paper, most of it. Yeah, so there isn't really a huge distinction. However, at the end of the day, I would say roughly there's about 30 or 40% more content that you need to know for H2 that H1 doesn't cover. So of course it requires a lot of extra effort, but I would say that if a student is very conscientious, if he's very hardworking, the amount of effort that you have to put in for H2 economics in comparison to or relative to H1 economics is actually far less if you were to compare, let's say, H1 math versus H2 math or H1 physics versus H2 physics.
Okay, so just a little bit of clarification. So prior to the syllabus change in 2017 and beside 2017, so it seems like there's a more stark contrast. Would you say that?
Correct.
So like about 30 to 40% more.
Yeah, correct.
H1, H2.
In the past, it's like it's roughly all the same lah, but like now, like I think they actually realized the problem, which was if for H1 and H2 is like if it's almost exactly the same, then what's the point of taking H1? So they actually took out specific topics from the H1 syllabus, which we no longer have to study. So actually now there's a bigger disparity, but I would still say it's quite slim. Yeah.
Okay. Now then it begs us to answer the question, like since we have H1 versus H2, so which do you recommend us to take? Like since like we know that it's more content heavy, but which one will affect us? Like let's say like in our choices for university, so like H2, H1, etc.
For economics, unlike other subjects like math, actually it's not a prerequisite for any university course per se. In fact, I had students who actually entered university like these students are like not for econs for the other programs offered by our center. They actually did not have economics background at all, but they still entered like NUS econs or even NTU econs. So by right, you don't really need econs for any subject per se, but nonetheless, I would say that the fundamentals of economics are still very relevant, especially as you go into courses like business, finance, and obviously NUS econs or NTU econs. So wait, pause. So like this one can edit, right? So what's the question again? I like the prerequisite, right?
Yeah. So prerequisite. So maybe let me rephrase the question. So we would like to understand a little bit better about is there any like impact, for example, like H2 economics to university choices, etc.
Yeah. Wait, so like answered lah in a way. Yeah. So okay, don't need to talk about more. Don't need to say more, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Okay, yes, and we also have other questions. For example, like since we know that H1 and H2 economics, yes, they give us very interesting world views as well as a micro view. So and it's also a very interesting subject to take. Is there any way where we can study it effectively? Like maybe like coming from student point of view, is it like similar to studying like geography, like history? Like is it like rote learning, or how do we score in economics?
I feel like there's a lot of different approaches to studying economics. I feel like the way that I conduct my lessons is more unique because it's very, very application heavy. So I must admit that I'm a bit exam centric. At the end of the day, my main goal as a tutor is obviously to get my student a A. And I think so far over the last few years, I've been rather successful in terms of my entire philosophy towards approaching the subject. I mean, especially since like my distinction rate is about 74% on average compared to the national distinction rate of about only 42%. So the way that I will actually conduct my lessons is actually very application heavy. So we will actually cover a lot of different model essays, go through the entire process of what makes a good essay, or what is the essential jargon or the essential writing techniques that is required for you to score. So it's not exactly just memorize and regurgitate. In fact, I always scold my students for doing that. It's more of understanding that there's a lot of systematic links, which is processes in economics where you go from A to B to C to D to E. So you need to make sure that you understand that it's a very, very systematic process. And once you actually understand the entire process of how different variables affect different indicators or how the entire economy works, I think actually economics is actually one of the easiest subjects to score. So it really depends on who your teacher is and the philosophy that he subscribes to, because that will also determine the way that he will approach teaching the subject. So I'll say compared to schools generally what they like to do is they like to use a lot of real world examples also. They like to give like case studies. They like to say, based on this case study, what can you infer? And then they ask you to actually do reports on it. So while I find that effective, I feel like there are better ways of going about doing it, but it really just depends on your teacher's approach. Yeah.
I guess there must be something that you're really doing so well in this. I mean, like if the national average is about 40%, if I'm not wrong, and your students score an average of about 72%.
74, yeah.
74%. Well, that's really, really great results. So from just now when we talk about like content and you have so much passion for this. So but we want to understand a little bit better. How do you manage to break down such a difficult, and it seems like it's not rote learning, and there's a lot of application, so it must be something that you have done really well to help your students to learn this. So my question is, between H1 and H2 economics, so when we are discussing about sitting for the paper, so can you tell us like what are the differences, like in the number of papers that we sit for, as well as the difficulty? I guess we have covered about like 30-40%, so probably at the end of the examination, I mean the end goal, which is the examinations.
So for H1 economics, what happens at the end is actually for A levels itself, it's split up into two 45-mark case studies. So what a case study essentially is they'll give you 4 to 5 extracts together with figures and tables of information for you to actually dissect. And based on the information provided, what you actually need to do is actually use the information found to answer the question. So it's not really like very open-ended. It's not just like, tell me this, tell me that. It's based off the extract, based off this information I presented to you. After you have analyzed it, how can you actually answer the question taking into account all these information? So it's purely just 2 case studies, each 45 marks. Typically, the 45 marks is split up into 2 parts. Lower order questions, where it's very simple response questions, whereas there's higher order questions where you actually have to think thoroughly, present both sides of the argument, and actually evaluate at the end. So that's for H1 economics. Generally, a lot of students have the misconception that for the 45 marks, one paper will be testing J1 topics and the other paper will be testing J2 topics. But what we actually see at A levels is there's a lot of cross topics going on. So you can actually see that both 45 marks case studies is actually testing a bit of J2, a bit of J1 combined together. So that misconception is actually very, very common. So just be aware that at the end of the day, it isn't as simple as there's an order to it, or one is just J1 topics, another is J2, but they can actually test everything like quite messily, I would say.
I see. So I guess like one question can broach into many different topics.
Correct.
So I guess like with your guidance, that's the reason why your students were able to get a very macroscopic point of view from micro and macroeconomics and gel them all together.
Correct.
Yeah. So one more thing that was on my mind was since like there's a lot of application questions. So how do you?
Can I pause? Yeah, I never thought about H2.
Oh, okay. So
should I talk about it also?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Okay, do I just begin?
Yes.
Okay, so in comparison,
I think let's restart the question.
From the start,
no, from the H1 and H2.
Okay. So like, do I? Oh my God, there was a bee that just banged into our window. Okay.
Okay, I'll ask the question again.
So I go from the start.
So yeah, so
Oh,
we
can,
can start
okay,
yeah,
okay.
from H1, H2.
Okay, I'll try to summarize a bit more. I think I went a bit lost all. Yeah.
Yeah, so that must have been such an amazing. Okay, let me just fix that. Okay, that's really amazing to think about it. Like if the national average for A is about 40%, and you help your students, coach them and mentor them to an average of 74% of A, that's really remarkable. And you mentioned that like economics is not about rote learning. There's actually a lot of application. So I guess students must have benefited so much from your overflow of energy and to inspire them to really analyze for themselves. So, but I'm coming from a more academical point of view. So tell us the differences. For example, when we are sitting for the papers for H1 versus H2 economics.
So I'll begin with H1 economics. For H1 economics is actually split up into two papers, which is not two papers, two different parts, which is consisting of two different case studies. So each case study is actually 45 marks and comprises of both lower order and higher order questions. So what happens is at the start of the case study, they will actually give you roughly about 4 to 5 different extracts regarding a specific market or regarding a specific country. For example, they can test you the market for milk, the market for cars, the market for even healthcare, and in comparison they can also say, oh, here is the economy of Brazil, here's the economy of Japan. So they'll give you all this information regarding a particular topic or country, and based off that information, what you need to do is you need to take the evidence that you have dissected to answer the questions found later on in the paper. So out of the 45 marks, like I said, there's lower order questions, which is quite simple. It's just straightforward, answer straight to the point. In comparison, there's also higher order questions worth more marks, where actually you have to present both sides of the argument and actually evaluate at the end. So for H1, it consists of 2 of those 45 mark case studies, which students actually find a bit more challenging. In comparison, for H2, they also have 2 case studies, but the 2 case studies, the distinction is number 1, there are less questions. So instead of 45 marks, there's only 30 marks. And at the same time, the amount of extracts provided might be sometimes a bit less, especially since there's less marks being awarded for the questions. So there's also 2 case studies. So that's paper number 1. Typically, it will last about 2 hours and 15 minutes. In comparison, something that H1 syllabus does not have is actually the essay questions. So open-ended essays, and typically A-levels like to test it in the Singaporean context. So they just ask you one 10 mark or one 15 mark question, and you have to actually answer 3 of those 10 plus 15 mark questions at A-levels itself. So typically they'll give you 6 options, you just have to choose 3. So this additional component is something that's not found in the H1 syllabus. It actually used to be part of the H1 syllabus before 2017, but of course this changes were made recently to the syllabus, so it's no longer found in H1. However, personally, and I feel like I echo the thoughts and sentiments of a lot of students, we actually find that the essay component of Econs is actually far easier to score. And if I were to go back to the national distinction rate, for H1 economics, it's actually 32% only. So if I were to compare, H1 Econs has a lower national distinction rate, and at the same time, they have the harder component, which is case study. But for H2, the national distinction rate is higher, and at the same time, they have the essay component, which a lot of students found easier. Yeah.
Can I just summarize a little bit in this way, such that like H1 and H2 economics, we do say that H2 economics does have a little bit more depth
Correct.
in terms of content, but it's also easier for students to score.
I would say so. Yeah.
Oh, I guess that's a very, very good food for thought for our audience. So when you're deciding between your H1 and H2 economics. So really thank you so much for this insight. I think it will really help our students and our audience to make a more informed decision. Well, we also have some questions that's submitted from our audience, so let's just take a look at that. So we have understood the implications. So there was this student that asked like, so do you think that I should take H1 economics like after reading the 10-year series and the MOE syllabus and the notes, and I really do not like it. I hate it. So what is taking economics like? What is your view on the subject?
I would say that if you were to just look at like an exam paper without understanding the fundamentals, it will be very actually difficult for you to actually decide whether it's hard or not. Because obviously if you don't know anything about the subject, you will find it hard. For example, you might give me a bio 10-year series or physics 10-year series. I was a pure art student, so when I look at those papers, I'm like, wow, I don't understand anything. It must be hard. However, if you were to actually take economics in JC and actually go through the fundamentals, actually when you take a look at the A-level examination papers from your 10-year series, in fact, most of my students actually enjoy doing the questions because they realize that actually it's very, very fun in a way to actually apply all the technical jargon or all the concepts that you learn in class and answer questions at A level. So I'll say that
So I guess like there must be
Yeah.
one very important component which I found like I saw that you introduced like crash courses
Yeah,
to help
correct.
students, and this have such great reviews and positive affirmation from students who benefit. So I guess that was probably like the bridge. So that's really amazing that you can bring something which is very difficult to understand, maybe for new beginners, like doing starting with a 10-year series and
Yeah.
trying to understand economics and breaking it down as probably as simple as drinking water and very easy to digest for them. So uh, that's really remarkable. And anything that you think that we can add, because like some students have a question like, hey, is economics like similar to some of the humanities like geography? Like, can we study that in the same way, or like it's different in different ways? Like, how can we understand this subject better?
As a geography student myself, and I actually studied history for about 1 month before I decided to change my subject combi in JC. But I guess I'm not the best to actually talk about history, so I'll stick to geography. The way I actually studied the two subjects was actually quite different. I'll say that geography is a lot more content heavy as compared to economics. In fact, I'll say that economics is probably the least content heavy humanity subject,
I
maybe
see.
other than literature. So I'll say that the approach is very different. For geography, you have to really read up a lot, really understand it very thoroughly, and it's still application based, but generally it's not as application based compared to econs. It still can be theoretical in nature, where in comparison, econs is very application based. Rarely nowadays at A levels they're shifting away from the direction where they no longer actually test questions which are open ended in a way where you don't have to actually apply context or like bring in the nature of economies or like specific specific circumstances. So I'll say that it's for econs is more application heavy, whereas geography is still a bit more memory work as compared to econs.
I
Yeah.
see, I see. So I guess like during the course of the interview, we have come to some very good summaries between H1 and H2 economics, and we saw that despite having a little bit more content for H2 economics, it does make good economic sense in a way
Yeah.
to actually like study H2, since it is actually easier to score and get a better distinction. And we also saw that like even despite the course having lots more application in the testing, so you manage to help students to understand and apply for themselves, like break it down from very complex topics to answer like even essay questions based on Singapore's context. So thank you so much, Mr. Evans, for your time and appearing on our interview. So for more information, we will be having another seminar to help students answer questions about subject choices, as well as which of this combination does suit your child better. So stay tuned for it.